Thank you, Beth. Call this regular meeting of Grand Forks City Council to order. First item of business is the adoption of the agenda for October 21st. Motion, Councillor Corlick, second, Councillor Studley, all those in favor. Second is we have a couple of go-in camera minutes, so can I have approval of those two go-in camera minutes? Or is there one, especially one?
Only one.
No, it's only one, it's just stretched out.
Yeah.
October 7th. Motion, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Corlick, all in favor. Next one is the October 7th regular meeting. Motion to adopt. Councillor Moslin, Councillor Thompson, all those in favor. Business arising, I never would have voted to put off the remuneration for 2 years. I thought after UBCM that we felt that that was the kind of thing that if we wanted to get more millennials, we would have dealt with it earlier, but I think we can always move that up. I'm hoping that Zach's group is beginning fairly quick. He's meeting on the 7th of...
We're still deciding somewhere in that week we're gonna meet.
Right, so he's moving ahead on that, but that would be an ideal thing to throw to that group for a comment anyway. Anyway,
I'm gonna start keeping track of the hours that I spend.
well, it was a motion
I mean,
by
I would
Councillor
like to know.
Moslin. I don't think that's reversible if we decide we want to do
No,
it.
no, but just for my own benefit, how many hours, and I'll probably start with today, because that was a year ago that we were elected, or maybe November, I guess we were sworn in.
Anniversary.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was some
And,
really, some of you putting in some really long hours.
Yeah, and
Because you
so-
go to all the meetings I go to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, just to see.
Okay, any further business arising from the 7th of October? Hearing none. Moving down to the verbal report from the regional district. I won't labor on here, but there are a couple things I wanted to comment on. The regional district is struggling whether to...
Council report.
Did we miss council reports?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, and then we go to that, yeah, council reports. We don't have any, but we have verbal council reports. So, around the table, Councillor Zelinski,
I'll pass tonight, thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
The only thing I would report is that I did attend the advisory group meeting last week, and that you have appointed me to take your place at the table,
Exactly.
which I am pleased to do.
Thank
So I
you
will
very
be at
much
their
for
meeting
that. So
tomorrow.
you'll be sitting with Councillor Moslin, and I don't know whether you get 1 or 2 votes at that table, but the chair will decide and the
Yep.
group will decide. Nothing further?
Nope, that's all I have to report.
Councillor Studley?
Nothing much. Just want to remind people there's lots of great stuff happening around Halloween time, so just keep an eye out on local media for what's all happening downtown for Halloween and other locations for Halloween.
Thank you. Councillor Moslin?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I was really busy last Tuesday, so I didn't get it in. But I do have a report I'd like to go over. The first one is that the Social Service Advisory Group meeting did meet on October the 15th. And it was, at that meeting, Darren Pratt did agree to chair the committee for that meeting and for following meetings. He also presented the provincial and federal standards for a point-in-time count. I was really glad to see yourself, Councillor Thompson, and CAO Matusi there, because it is a complicated thing if it's to be done well. The table decided that they try to prepare for a count to be conducted this spring. That would be a formal point-in-time count. Nonetheless, an informal count will be sufficient for the immediate needs. The table also decided to continue to work together to find an appropriate cold weather shelter. The Recreation Commission meeting was held earlier, October the 10th. There was a significant review during that meeting of the proposed 5-year sustainable financial plan. The committee is also planning a review of the RDKB bylaw 932, which governs the Rec Commission. It's dated 1996, needs some tidying up. Unfortunately, I think as most of the public know, the pool deck repairs are not completed in time for the October 21st opening. So the Aquatic Center is aiming to open this Thursday, October the 24th instead. On October the 19th, I attended the Phoenix Foundation Social at Gallery 2. There were brief reports from several beneficiaries from around the Boundary. The Boundary has accumulated over $3 million in trust in the Phoenix Foundation. That money is used, the interest of that money is used to support volunteers and works throughout the Boundary. The reports were heard from a Midway Seniors residents that got a new kitchen. The Fall Fair got a grant, a Phoenix grant to display community quilts, as well as fire extinguishers for the demolition derby. It's kind of A to Z. And a group from Rock Creek did thank the foundation for their support of the local medical center. Finally, I'd like to give a shout out to the Grand Forks Community Trail Society. It was great to see Michelle Millette and her partner repaint the kiosk at the Darrell Preed Trestle. I have a long history with that kiosk, and it was gratifying to see it so well cared for. The group also carried out a significant work party on October 20th to cut back overhanging brush in the North Fork section of the DCT. And to them, a big shout out, and of course to all the volunteers who help support our trail system. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Gorlick.
Well, I have really nothing to report, and I feel very guilty after listening to Councillor Moslin. But I did have a great few days off, so thank you.
This is not a competition. Councillor Thompson.
I just wanted to add that due to this cold/flu that I've been suffering, I wasn't able to attend the award ceremony on Thursday night that honored Danny Delisle and Amber Sopolov from the DBA, and Jeff Farrell and Vanessa Fabo from the Chamber of Commerce, and Mrs. Emery, well, I can't make it, Patty Emery, I believe, is her name, as volunteer of the ward because of her cleanup at the dog park. And regrettably, I was not able to attend the Phoenix Foundation's annual social. I had been the liaison for council for several years. And again, because of this, whatever it is that doesn't seem to want to go away, I wasn't able to attend, so thank you.
And our two recipients of the award are here this evening. Congratulations. Thank you. Is that further reports? Hearing none. Can I have a motion to accept council reports? Councillor Corlick, seconded by Councillor Walensky. All those in favor? Okay, now we're down to the regional district report. Regional district is struggling with the whether to declare a climate emergency or not. It's a very contentious issue. Some are wanting to draw more attention to it. Others are feeling it's an overreaction in terms of what they're doing. But at this point, it's been deferred, but they are continuing to look at that, whether they would look at a regional district climate emergency declaration, which some regional districts have done. Contaminated soils. I know that this was a hot issue for us because it kind of bounced out at us. It is an assigned responsibility to staff, and so what you got was not a request for permission, but a report. And so in discussions, what we've decided is we need to really describe what the contaminated soils are, that they're not coming from a nuclear plant. In most cases, what we're getting is contamination by hydrocarbons, and it's something that's fairly easy for us to handle and gives us the advantage of having cover for the landfill. So you can expect some clarification on the wording of that, maybe some idea of what's serious contamination and what's light contamination. But I brought that forward from council's concerns. And the final thing was that we had a long workshop on Indigenous relations. Very complex. I have a report. There's a report up online talking about what native bands and what responsibilities we have throughout our region and also throughout this local area in terms of consulting and speaking to Indigenous groups. So those things are available if anybody would like to look at them. Councillor Moslin.
Okay, would you entertain a question or two, Your Worship?
Yes.
The first question is, where are we with the Trails Master Plan? I mean,
You know, it hits the table at the Boundary Economic Development Group, because that's where it's funded through. And so I can report back to you on that. At this point in time, I don't have anything new than what I reported before, that we have funded it, that it's ongoing. There is clarification required, and I know what you're asking about is it moving forward or is it stalled?
Yes, but I thought that it was going to be moving on to what I think was called Phase 2. And I haven't heard a report, or there hasn't been any word from any consultant on the issue. Trails issues do have a habit of coming back, or coming around.
Going in circles?
Well, we're going through the Columbian Western Trail Society and the redesignation of the Trans-Canada Trail between Castlegar and Christina Lake.
Right.
It would have been nice to have a Trails Master Plan process at least going, if not the master plan, but to at least allow some sort of more organized input.
I could certainly invite you to speak to that at the next regional economic development plan, or group that meets. There's a meeting coming up in I think, the next couple of weeks.
All right. I don't mind speaking more, not so much that particular issue, but I sure would like to encourage the regional district and its partners to get on with the Trails Master Plan.
Yes, and I think you'd be best in impressing them with your concerns directly if you're interested in that.
Okay.
We'll set that up.
Yeah, please let me know the date of the next meeting.
I will.
Okay?
And further questions?
You know what, Mayor, I think I'll talk to you about it in camera. Or not in camera, outside the room. I don't want to talk about it in public. Okay?
Something embarrassing for us?
Yeah,
Yes, I certainly will sit down with you if you have other concerns.
thank you.
Okay. And a motion to accept the regional district report. Motion by Councillor Studley, Councillor Thompson, all those in favor. And the next item is the Downtown Business Association Downtown Improvement and Recommendations in regard to revitalization. And at this point in time, this is arising from the correspondence. Do we have any comment on this? Councillor Moslin.
Thank you, Worship. I understand that this letter went through several different iterations and refinements. Are we required, are we just receiving this for information?
I think so, because the lighting thing, I'm not sure has been determined yet, and how we're going to respond to it. Daniel, can you report?
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, like, one part that the DBA is hoping for is, for example, to connect the Christmas lights that they're hoping to hook up on their awnings to the city's power grid that's already there in some of those trees and along some of the street poles. So, like, that's something that we as staff can't make the determination to let that proceed. It would be great for council to make a determination in there. The manager of operations is here as well to answer some questions if there's anything operationally, if it's possible to do, because that's outside of my realm.
I would put forward a resolution that the downtown business be allowed to tie into our power for the Christmas lighting. Kevin, help me. What am I saying?
You're doing okay so far.
Well, just so that, you know, that they can plug into our services on the trees, our power.
Did you want us to read the comment on
Yeah,
this?
it would
Well, that's why I made the motion.
Based on our assumptions.
Yeah.
And all
So,
that.
we don't have a second around that yet?
No, I know.
Councillor Thompson, Councillor Corley.
Questions?
Well, we're not going to vote on it until we hear from David.
Okay, please comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So So in reading the letter here, there was some concerns about the decorative lighting, the lights going down Market. So we were waiting, trying to do a LED retrofit for those lights, but we're having problems sourcing out one that fits with those heads. So we did put the incandescent lights in, so those are all illuminated right now. We're looking at putting 3 different styles of decorative LED lights, and then we'll be looking for some feedback to see which one we would go with replacing all of them. So that's in the works right now, but there are, all the lights are working right now down Market. So I think that's alleviated that part. For putting the LED strings or strands on the awnings in front of businesses, we did have some issues with how we would connect them to our decorative poles. So we were running extension cords in the trees and stuff, but we had to do some upgrades, I guess, to try to make that as appropriate as we could. For missing some of the trees, not all the trees down Second and Market were lit up. So there may be the odd tree that has the strand not working, but generally if they're not lit up, they were not lit up in the first place. So, but we can look into the code specifications and see what kind of load we're looking at for attaching LED lights to the awnings and either come back to council or proceed if that's what council wishes for us to do.
Thank you. And Councillor Thompson, did you want
I think.
to place a motion forward on this?
Well, there is a motion on the table.
Did we have the wording clear on it? You were asking for help on it.
Yeah, Kevin.
Resolve that council permit downtown businesses to tie into city power for the purposes of running Christmas lights.
Okay,
On their
Probably
own.
have to be a little more.
that deals
in the
with
office.
that one issue.
That was on the awnings, I believe. Yeah,
It doesn't deal with, so the rest of it we're leaving up to,
well, we're just dealing with this one thing right now.
you're okay with that then, David?
I'm happy to look in to see if we're not violating anything or
Okay.
we have the capacity to put that connection in, I guess.
All right. Councillor Moslin, or Councillor. Good morning. Councillor Zelinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you already mentioned the load factor, which would be a concern. Also the hanging factor as far as extension cords across the sidewalk. I hope that gets back to you. Thanks.
Councillor Thompson, speaking to your motion.
Well, speaking to my motion, maybe a bit of an amendment that provided it meets all of the requirements for load and safety.
And I would think he would jeopardize his reputation by not doing that.
No, but I mean, you know, that so that we're not giving direction without allowing our management
Some discretion,
to come back to us and say, no, that's not going to work because.
right?
So that's why I'm.
And the seconder is okay with that changes? Councillor Zelinski, I think you were second on that?
No, that was.
That was Councillor Paul.
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So is that it?
I can work with that, yes, thanks.
Okay, so that's the motion on the floor. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, anything further on the DBA letter? Councillor Moslin?
The tree, Your Worship, I really wanted to hear from the operations manager, Your Worship, about the tree. I did went and kicked the bricks myself. It's a maple tree, it's a beautiful tree, but it's definitely leaning.
The time and place,
That's the one.
location, yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have been to that location before because that same tree was lifting bricks and the sidewalk panel. We actually cut out a piece to try to give it a little bit more space, but it seems content to try to lift the bricks up and cause a bit of a hazard. So with our tree bylaw. If it's causing grief with infrastructure and that, we do have the ability to remove the tree. There's 2 in that little area.
Yes.
Plus one around the corner that has basically outgrown its area. So, and it's blocking one of the corner streetlights. So there's a few trees around town that we would like to look at removing over the next year and replanting a smaller tree, just because of interference with infrastructure, I guess.
Okay, Councilor Zelinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to take this opportunity to ask where we are with the 4-way stop on 2nd and Market.
So there was a report that came back. So Mr. Gates was looking at that. So I'm trying to get access through his email to get the final report back. But it should be there.
ICBC?
Yes,
Mr. Gates?
that's right.
Okay, just for clarity here, so ICBC's involvement in this is clear.
Yeah, I thought it would have been a done deal by now.
Councilor Moslin, looking like you're on.
Well, I defer to Councilor Thompson.
So back to the trees, so are you going to be removing them if they are lifting sidewalks?
I'd like to remove that one in front of Time and Plate, because we have been there a few times. We've cut the roots, we've opened it up, and it is leaning, and it seems to be an ongoing issue with us. So I would like to take that one, and there's 2 other ones that are outgrown their space downtown. So I'd like to take those out over the winter and then replace them in the spring.
So those are operational decisions you'll make based on the risk factors and various other things you're looking at there?
Correct. Like the one is so large it's lifting up the curb and gutter.
Yeah.
So then you have pooling on one side, and then you have freezing in the winter. So it would be nice to deal with that.
Yeah. Okay. Comfortable with that, Council? So can we accept this, Councilor Moslin?
There was another issue, Your Worship, and that was the one about the bench.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I comment on it?
You certainly can.
Thanks, Your Worship. I would generally be very opposed to removing an amenity, a sidewalk amenity like that bench. However, I think if we can redesign that seating area, because right now what's happening, my understanding after talking to staff, is that the planters are hiding the benches from view. And that's deemed to be a bit of a security problem. I would be much more in favor, Your Worship, and I think if we start taking that tree out, that it might impact that area anyways, because it's really close to that sitting there. Anyhow, it might be an opportunity to reconfigure the benches and the planters in such a way that the benches would be open to view, but still be available to public to enjoy our downtown core from.
And because it has become a smoking area for people to sit and smoke, I think there's some need at this point for consultation with the immediate merchants there as to whether or not they would like to continue to designate that as a smoking area. As you remember, when we put in the smoking bylaws, we said that individual businesses and organizations could identify smoking areas. That seems to be one by default, so I don't know where that's going at this point, but I think there's some reason to follow through with involvement with the merchants about that design there. As you said, you hate to take out amenities that are making it more livable.
Right.
Councilor Corlett?
I think with the replacement of the larger trees with smaller trees, that's going to probably alleviate some of the loitering because it'll be hot and people won't be able to sit under a tree for shade. So that might resolve itself even with a little bit of configuration.
Councilor Mosley?
Just one more comment, Your Worship. I want to thank the businesses that have done all the work in front of their establishments. There's there's tables and platters and all sorts of things. There's even the chess set that I noted in front of Dave Tails. I mean, there's all sorts of things to engage pedestrians. That whole idea has come a long way in 10 years.
Absolutely. You know, I think we need to give credit for that kind of initiative by all of the downtown council. And this letter becomes one we're accepting. We haven't dealt with everything in it, but I think a motion to accept this letter at this point would be in order. Councillor Corlick, Councillor Studley, all those in favor? Okay. Thank you very much to the DBA.
Accepted for information.
Yeah, accepted for information and for further work. I mean, there are a number of questions in there we haven't responded to adequately. All right. And moving forward to information items, I know that our CIO is on vacation. If anyone is speaking to this, or whether we're going to just simply accept the report and comment on it.
I would just move that we receive the report for information.
And the seconder for that? Councillor Studley, and discussion? Councillor Zelinski.
Yeah, I guess the one thing that kind of struck me again is we had the question at our last regular meeting. So we're 3.5 million short in flood repairs. Where's the money coming from? And we know some of those things on that list of the capital projects are already completed. The expo sign service speaks to me there. So I'm just wondering, hopefully in the near future, we can go through this capital list to find out what our capital plan actually is and what projects should be there and not on there. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, did we vote on that?
Yeah.
We'll vote to. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. All right, so we moved along quickly through our agenda tonight because I think that a lot of people are here to have an open discussion about the consideration of options report that we have in front of us. And I'm not sure how we're presenting this. We have a written report. I can open it, but Dee Dee may have some things that she would planning like to comment on this to open discussions. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so at the last meeting, council asked for some help in getting through this issue, and so one of the first things that we did was to see what other communities were doing. And I tried to kind of stick to communities that were of similar size, but I also went up to as large as Kelowna and Kamloops just to see how other communities were dealing with this. And for the most part, what I found is that the communities put these types of facilities in commercial zones. And so the bulk of them were in commercial. Some other zones, Camel River was a zone they called public areas. They did a comprehensive development zone in Cranbrook, which was surrounded by industrial on one side and residential on the other. Dawson Creek was in a commercial, but it was kind of closer to a residential area. And Roslyn is in the process, Revelstoke is in the process right now doing a temporary use permit to put it in the basement of a church. And that church is zoned, I believe it's institutional. And then Trail has, it's a permitted use in their zone, and they define it as a rooming unit. So I guess what we found is that every community is dealing with this in a different way. The bulk of them is in the commercial zones. So when we started looking at it, it's a really big issue and it's very complex. And so we found, kind of going in circles a little bit and thought, let's just bring this back to the very basics of who, what, when, where, why, how, and let's just break this down into smaller, manageable pieces and deal with the highest priority issue, which would be the need for, I would say, a seasonal emergency shelter right now for this winter. And so I went and looked through different references and put in links to the different places that we went, which was the Homeless Hub, BC Housing, and then we looked, Columbia Basin Trust had some really good information, and the City of Vancouver had some really good information as well. And the Columbia Basin Trust housing continuum found to be quite helpful, as they had kind of some descriptions of the different types of housing on the continuum, and it's relevant because it's local, reasonably local. And so we went to this and just thought, okay, we need to start with seasonal shelter, so let's figure out how can we focus on that, and let's just deal with one of these issues at a time. And I've kind of noticed that the conversation always seems to, you know, go into the entire spectrum of affordable housing and kind of up and down and back and forth. And so it gets really, really complex really, really fast. So we thought if we could come up with some of the gaps, which the gap that we felt was the location, which seems to be something that we're struggling with, and identification of the need. So that's put together the a little further down. So just a very high-level process framework that we can apply, and looking at the housing continuum, and at the very top would be the immediate need would be for a shelter, and that would be for folks who are unsheltered. And from my understanding from the meeting of the Social Services Committee is that they'd be looking at this point and relying on the informal counts from the agencies that are currently involved to come up with those numbers, the who and the number. And it would be the seasonal shelter. And so we need to identify who and how many, and also the where. And so we feel the best way forward is to come up with some criteria or parameters in order to identify acceptable locations in the city for shelter.
Okay. And thank you for working all weekend to get it done. I know we throw some things at staff sometimes that are pretty difficult. Councillor Zielinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I got a couple of questions, but I'll start with the first one. You mentioned that your report has communities our size, and I'm kind of concerned or curious which ones are our size. I see Kamloops, Kelowna, Nelson, Penticton, Revelstoke, a little bit bigger than what I think our size is. Comments, please.
Comment on comparable size?
It's really difficult to find information on the smaller communities. It was actually, a lot of these facilities seem to not have a lot of information available. So Grand Forks is not just servicing the community of 4,000, the shelter is also servicing the regional area. So that would bring us up into a more comparable size with Nelson or Trail or Castlegar, those communities.
Okay, thank you. Taking it as a regional service. And Zielinski, follow-up?
Yes, and I think on an email, more on the group that Councillor Moslin and now Councillor Thompson's on, I didn't see any RDKB representation if it's a regional service. Are they getting involved in this group or whatnot, or on the recommendations? Okay, seeing as there's no answer for that, I'll move on to the next one. So I'm not sure that what we have in front of us is exactly what the request was from council at the last meeting. So anyway, to make things a little clearer and give us a little bit more direction, I'd like to propose a motion and see if I get a seconder and see where it goes. The motion says the City of Grand Forks believes that it's the city's responsibility to have an emergency shelter established within the city.
One second.
Councillor Corley seconds that motion, puts it on the floor. Councillor Thompson.
Well, I have to speak against this resolution. It's not just the city, as you said, Councillor Zelinski, it's the surrounding area. And I don't want to see people out in the freezing cold. However, we do not have the financial resources to fund all of this. And BC Housing has certain criteria that they demand, and it's a permanent shelter, and I, at this point in time, don't see an area that I could support for a permanent shelter, and I think this needs a lot more work. I would support finding something temporarily, but not on a permanent basis. I think we have to help these people. And I think this needs a lot more discussion. I was at the meeting last week. And I believe there is going to be considerable discussion. We're having another meeting tomorrow with respect to this particular issue. But again, I just don't see with all of the things that our community has faced in the last year and a half, that we have either the financial or staff resources to deal with this. And I think it needs to become a regional issue, and I think the regional district needs to be invited to sit at that table.
Following up on your question about that, it just threw me for a bit because we have brought it up at the regional economic development level, where there is a buy-in from all of the region in terms of this being a regional service. It's also understood that a lot of the services at the table are already regional services. The RCMP, the hospital, the mental health and addictions. I mean, most of the services that sit at the table have a regional aspect to them. If you're asking whether or not there should be regional district money coming in for a service, I would think that would be appropriate if we have a place for our participation. But at this point, the path forward is to define a location, a program, and a provider, and BC Housing, I think, is the one we look to for funding, not to the city or to the regional district. So in terms of them taking responsibility at that table, Rolly Russell would be the only one appropriate unless he appoints someone to sit there. But I think the regional responsibility is clearly indicated by all of the regional services that participate at the table. Councillor Thompson?
I hear what you're saying, Mayor. BC Housing is a funding agency, will not fund temporary shelters. They have to be permanent. And quite frankly, at this point in time, I'm not prepared to support a permanent shelter until I have a lot more information. I do believe that there needs to be representation from area. If we're going out to the entire region, from Area C to Area E, and Area C, and the city of Greenwood and the village of Midway, I think there has to be representation from those communities that are also impacted by this issue.
How would you see that representation forming? What form would it take?
It would be an invitation from Mr. Pratt, and it's maybe something that I can bring up at the table tomorrow.
Yes.
Because I don't think it's only the city council that should be sitting at that table. I think there needs to be other elected officials sitting at that table as well.
Okay, and let me clarify one thing about temporary, permanent. What they mean by not supporting a temporary shelter is one that operates where you come in at 8 o'clock at night and you have to leave at 8 in the morning. They don't support that. But they do support shelters that operate 24 hours as a service. And as far as the way it's being presented by, it's not, it'd be nice not to have a permanent shelter and to have housing first approach or some other approach, but I don't think it's fair at this point. BC Housing has been begging us as a community last year and this year, show us something that we believe can work and we'll fund it. So again, we're at the same point this year where it's incumbent on us to ask BC Housing for funding for something that we agree would be a reasonable winter shelter. And I think Councillor Corlick had her hand up first, then Councillor Zelinski.
Put me
Or
on
was
your
it-
list here.
I saw a hand there.
Oh, I know, I was just, temporary housing, is it, so you were talking about like 8 to 8, and I always think of that as a temporary is from now to the end of March or something, that's where I go for temporary, so I'm not sure.
Well, there's those two temporaries, the
Yeah.
daily operation temporary and the November 1st to April 1st, which was the old funding formula for temporary shelter, which they said they wouldn't fund, and then they went ahead and did it for half the province, including Grand Forks. Councillor Zelinski.
Well, it seems like there's a bit of confusion at this table. Boy, it would be nice if we had definitions that we all agreed on.
What's your definition of your motion?
It's up for debate. That's one of the things in there. But if we can agree that it is our responsibility, that it's our responsibility to create an emergency shelter, we can then define what that is.
Okay,
But
and
that's
you
the
realize
first
in making the motion, you commit yourself to supporting the motion?
And I don't commit to anything.
No, but is that not a rule? Can I
No,
ask for a
that is
ruling
not a
on that
rule.
from our CO?
It's a standard, but it's a guideline, but it's not a essential piece to support the motion.
Okay, and I always thought it was, but I'll correct, and you are correct. Councillor Moss.
Your Worship. Yeah, first I do want to thank staff for putting this report
Yes.
together. It is succinct. It doesn't have solutions. It didn't come up with a specific place. What they have tried to do, and I think quite well actually, is provide us with a process, a roadmap, how we're going to get there. Those last two attachments, D and E, are basically fill in the blanks. Who's going to do what? It's a process. It puts council at the center of the process to make the key decisions. And that's probably where the key decisions do rest. I am a little apprehensive about the motion because Councillor Zelinski, if you were then now to vote against the motion, it's kind of misleading. I do not see that this responsibility is solely the city's. Absolutely not. But that's not to say we don't share some of the responsibility with our provincial partners, okay, and our regional partners. We do. We all share it. So we do have responsibility. It's not solely our responsibility. But if we don't get involved in the process, well, we're just going to have to get ready to sit back and take whatever anybody hands out to us. We didn't like it last year when something happened on an informal basis and morphed into from a winter extreme shelter into what began to look like a permanent shelter. But other than saying no, we never said what we would do. And this is what staff is challenging us to do, to say what is it that you will live with, that you can envision for our community. I'm quite pleased with the process. I'd like to take the process through. Since I'm a little apprehensive of the motion, I'm going to abstain.
Can you offer a modification to this trick motion that Councillor
Well,
Zelinski
I don't want to use the word trick. I
do.
I believe that we are in part responsible.
Yes.
But we are not solely responsible.
Would that be a
Can I
friendly
amend
amendment to the motion, Councillor Zelinski?
What's the amendment?
The amendment would be that
Kevin, can you please put up that motion? I sent it to you so that we can amend it if need be.
Not from this computer, no I can't.
it's pretty
Send it to
short
Daniel.
if you wanted to repeat it.
Did you send it to Daniel? Because he can maybe bring it up on the screen there.
I would have to log into my email and everything. Can you quickly read it and I'll try?
Yeah, it's only a
Are you
sentence.
finished, Councillor Moss?
Well, if with clarification and with the mayor's guidance, I could propose a motion that basically would say the city shares responsibility.
Yes.
That would be the intent of the amendment.
So again, your amendment was pretty black and white. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I put this motion forward. The motion did say that the city of Grand Forks believes that it is the city's responsibility to have an emergency shelter established within the city.
A shared responsibility wording would satisfy Councillor Moslin's request for a modification of that?
The city believes that it is a shared responsibility
Yes.
to establish an emergency shelter, and you could scratch within the city's boundaries.
Okay, so to clarify, it does not say who funds it. It does not say how it gets there. It's just that within our boundaries, again, if it's written, would you like me to say it again?
Is that it?
The city of Grand Forks believes that it is the city's, yes, you betcha. So it doesn't say how it's funded, how it's going to get there. So
Are you arguing for or against the motion?
I'm explaining the motion.
Okay, but you're not stating your support for it in this discussion?
No, what I am stating is that just under 2 weeks ago, the mayor made a comment to CBC that says, until we get a understanding around this table, we're going to be spinning our wheels. I asked that we have that discussion at this table, whether or not this council is responsible for emergency shelter, or however you want to define it, a permanent shelter, whatever. We have not had that discussion, and my request did not make it to the agenda. So to be very clear to our community and this group, I put forward this motion to say that, yes, we're going to spend staff time on it and make sure that we get one established within this community, whatever definition you put around emergency shelter. So to me, this is a first step to say, yes, we're going to spend time on it. Not how it gets here or whatever, it's just that it's a needed service in this community.
And you're speaking against it with that clarification?
I'm not speaking against it, I'm saying that we have to be very clear whether or not it's a city responsibility. I think it's a land use issue, period. And with that, we need definitions in the bylaw to find out where we're going to put this use within our community. I don't, other than advocating and talking to people, I don't see us spending a lot of staff time spinning our wheels, as you said, Mr. Mayor, on this issue because, as someone pointed out, gosh darn it, winter came again.
Okay, so I would encourage council to not support this motion and to put forward a second motion, as Councillor Moslin has framed, that would say we have a shared responsibility. It's not entirely our responsibility at all. So are we ready for the question on the
Can I make an amendment, Your Worship?
Well, we've tried that, and Councillor Zelinski.
Well, I can move an amendment.
Yeah, you can. I forgot about that.
Okay.
Go ahead, move an amendment.
See if the amendment.
This is not a friendly amendment?
I'm assuming not. The city of Grand Forks believes that it is a shared responsibility to have a shared responsibility to have an emergency shelter.
And the seconder for that? I will second it.
Shared with whom? Again, like Councillor Zelinski, I was kind of leaving the door open. The assumption being that it would be everything from the provincial government to a federal government, that was providing grants on homelessness. Okay, so the senior governments would share the responsibility. They do share the responsibility. They have already indicated, through their practices, put up money for housing throughout the country. It is also, I believe, a responsibility that we share with our own citizens.
Local charities and churches.
And the services that are available to us. So we share this responsibility. Anyhow, that's my motion, my amendment to the main motion.
Which has been seconded. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I hear what you're saying about shared with other organizations and other levels of government. A couple of things. The Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions has a plan, but I don't believe they have any money to implement their plan. The committee that we sit on came up with a recommendation for temporary emergency shelter in what was the nurse's residence at the hospital. They're not prepared to, doesn't appear that they are prepared to work with the committee to make that facility available. So again, I just view that as downloading onto lower levels of government, something that the provincial government should be actively and proactively working with communities to do these things. And just, well, I got, that just is an irritant to me. And so if they're not going to work with us, they're not going to, there is a facility available. It probably wouldn't cost that much to bring it up to a standard where it could house these individuals over the winter and give the committee more time to work, get the pit count, work together with all levels of government and the agencies that sit at that table to come up with a solution that's going to work for everybody. But we knee-jerked last year, and it looks like we're probably going to be knee-jerking again this year, which I don't think is a benefit to anybody.
Councillor Moslin.
Yeah, thank you for your remarks, Councillor Thompson. And going back to Councillor Zelinski, I do agree with Councillor Zelinski that it's a land use question. And that's our responsibility. And if you look at the process that staff have put in front of us, it includes rezoning, a temporary use permit. Those are things that we, as a council, are responsible to do in our community. So we don't have the huge buckets of money, no. But we do have local expertise, and we are in control of our own zoning bylaws. And we have to do what we can. It seems to me to be unconscionable to turn our back on this problem. I just cannot accept that our community really wants us to do that. Anyhow, so that's why I would speak in favor of it being a shared responsibility. We have different roles to play within the responsibility. Ours might be to help the community because we know the people, facilitate the group, and to do the zoning. The hard work for us is the definitions of zoning. I share your disappointment that we have come so far without that. I feel kind of embittered about that. Anyhow, but I do believe that it is a shared responsibility, that we share it with other partners and our community at large, and that it would be unconscionable to turn our backs on it. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, and I agree with that we need to put some pressure on other parts of government to support what we're doing here. Councillor Thompson, I hope you're speaking in favor of the amendment because you make a great argument for why we should say this is not just our responsibility.
I would like to support the resolution, but I would...
The amendment or the resolution?
The amendment, sorry. I would be more comfortable if we define who we're sharing it with.
But if I said shared the responsibility with other levels of government and service providers,
yeah,
would that do it?
That would do it.
That's a friendly amendment to the amendment?
I accept that amendment.
I agree to that as a
Makes sense
seconder to
me.
that. So this is clarified. I think, Councillor Zelinski has pushed us towards a first step of saying it's not just us. We need to recognize that we do play an important role, and one of the major ones is where. But I think clearly we need to stand up and say this is on our table because of circumstances we can't control, and we're not the only ones responsible. Speaking for the amendment. Councillor Zelinski.
I guess the question is, even if we had a pile of money, even if we, the city, had a site, we do not have a provider as far as I know. And that's probably the biggest question in this community, is a provider the community has faith in to run whatever a emergency shelter means, or shelter.
Okay,
and so
I think you're getting off topic here in terms of what's on the table by bringing up the issue of provider, because clearly that is an issue that we need to deal with, but separate from our responsibility, which is what's on the table.
I think provider was put into this amended motion that I just heard, so.
Yes, correct. Service provider.
Yes.
Was there a provider? Did we say we needed a provider before we could share responsibility for what we're dealing with in our community?
I defer to Councillor Student.
With other service providers?
Well, the intent, Your Worship, is that, I was thinking more along the lines of interior health, the RCMP, and mental health providers, anchors, all those other agencies that do work with it. And to reiterate, or to agree with Councillor Zelinski, yes, whoever runs the shelter is the provider, I guess it's a provider, and they would have responsibilities too.
As well.
And so that, we are kind of getting the cart before the horse. I thank Councillor Zelinski for getting this on the table. But I guess I don't see the word existing service providers in there. The intent is that it would be other people, other agencies who are professionally and otherwise volunteering or whatever, dealing with this social problem.
Right, so we're mixing our providers here. You're talking the provider of the service called a shelter.
Well, it says service provider in the motion. That's what
Service
I'm reading.
providers, I hope that's plural.
It is.
Yeah, so we're talking about all of the people who are serving those populations that are having difficulties here. All right, are we ready for a decision on the amendment? This is an amendment that then states that we alone are not responsible, but we are in partnership with these other service providers and government levels of government to address the problem.
This is not a motion that commits the city to anything. It is
No.
a statement.
Exactly.
It commits to staff time. And overworked staff that we,
Councillor Zelinski, is your position that the city has no responsibility for this at all?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Our responsibility is to make sure we know what we're talking about, which means definitions of emergency shelter, whether it's a month to month, whether it's a 8 o'clock to 8 o'clock. So definitions in our bylaw is our responsibility. It's our responsibility to make sure that a facility like this, whatever it is situated in our community in an appropriate spot. So it's a land use issue. I truly believe those are our responsibilities. The other responsibility we have to all the groups within our community is to advocate, listen, and facilitate those groups. I have no problem with that. But again, we know we have an overworked staff. We know this issue is not an easy issue. And at the end of the day, we still haven't done a heck of a lot for our flood victims. And I think we should be concentrating our time that way. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Corley.
I thank you for the staff time put on this. Oh, sorry. So thanks very much for the staff, all the time you've put onto this report. I guess my concern is, one, the same thing you have, that our flood people need our help. Two, I'm a little bit confused about all this thing, because I thought the group, the advisory board that both of you are sitting on, I thought they were supposed to be doing something. And so far, I'm not hearing very much about anything that's coming from that, other than that, well, we discussed this, we discussed that, we haven't come to anything. And I kind of thought that's what you were coming back to us with. Not only what the staff has done, but what this group is supposed to be doing. And so far, I'm not seeing that.
Councillor Moslin.
Your worship, yeah, no, the group has petitioned. Councillor Thompson referred to the letter that they put forward and inquiring about the women's transition house. They pursued that. The group wrote that letter. Although they got informal notification that probably would not be on, the group is sending the letter anyways. Nothing like a paper trail. The group is also now writing and sending out somewhat of a similar letter to churches and other agencies, petitioning them for help and for space. Okay, the group is also, as I mentioned in my report, going to work to prepare a formal pit count. The group is certainly waiting for this report. They want to have a chance to talk about it and be insightful and give us advice back. I guess you better be careful what you wish for. They are going to come up with some advice. And they're going to send it back, and you guys will all shoot the messenger, and whatever, and we'll go on. But at the end of the day, we need an emergency shelter. We need a cold weather shelter. The group, the City and I was position of this group, and that group is a wide spectrum of people. They all see this as a need in our community. And I don't believe it's solely our responsibility, but I do believe we share some of the responsibility to make it happen. So yeah, the group is working. They've met 4 times. They're meeting a 5th time tomorrow. They're going to take this report, give them some time to, and I do hope that the group, Mayor, and will evolve. That is, probably take in more voices, different representation, whether it's other local governments or other private citizens. The group is public. The media is there. The intent is to do everything open and transparently, and try to solve the problem in the public view. That was not easy, but I'm hopeful that that's the case. So yes, the committee, the advisory group is doing things. And most importantly, providing a forum that the agencies themselves can communicate about the problem.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Mr. Mattoon.
Thank you, Your Worship, and not to enter the debate, but hopefully to help clarify. The most important thing, and Council recognizes that the last thing staff needs to do right now is to deal with this particular issue, and they've worked for many, many months dealing with the citizens that were impacted by the flood, and will continue to work on that. However, and I think always the optimist, I did hear that where there is agreement, and whether you call it sharing responsibility or facilitating part of the discussion, the city is part of this, because the minute that group comes up with a solution, you will have to react to it. And I think what the report is trying to say is, we're not assuming, I don't think staff ever assumed that we'd be going out and buying a site and we're going to now work nights to create a shelter on top of everything else Dolores has to do. But I think what we're saying is, how do we react to those requests. And right now, there's no basis. And this is not citing, and it is a citing question, this is not citing a normal land use. I mean, as a planner, I could say, well, you gotta be 10 feet from here, you put it in this location. The criteria a planner would do to assess this location would be very different than the decision you have to make as a council, where you take in the feedback of your community, right? So our answer would be somewhat technical, but of course you don't deal necessarily with the technical, you deal with the emotional and the fear and all those other things. So what staff is really asking of council is that we're gonna have to deal with this one way or another. And what we'd like to do is, in fact, sit down and start in that workshop process, really define what it is those areas are, what they mean to us, what is the definition. It would be really hard for staff to come up with a zoning bylaw and those definitions without really understanding where council, because we might provide a very technical, we could go and I'll tell you, what it says in Victoria would be very different than what it says in Kelowna. And so I think what we need is a made in Grand Forks definition. So it's really important that we, at least as a city, council allows us to go to the next stage where we start working through those things. So to us, define sharing and all that. I think one way or another you're in this, and you have been in this situation. What we're trying to do is help you define as a council through a democratic process what in fact those criteria that you believe are good Grand Forks criteria. And at the end of the day, there may not be any, but at least you have a thorough discussion of that fact. Right now, you've not really had that, right? But let's go through and let's talk about some of those things, and let's see if we can in fact find some middle ground, so that when groups approach us and say we'd like to build X, you've already discussed, what is that level of support? Yes, we may look at it, but it needs to have security 24 hours. It needs to be a service provider that we trust and have faith in, because we're going to get the calls if it goes sideways. If you have that discussion and staff know that criteria, now we can start working with those groups who are going to come up with lots of different ideas. At least we can start channeling them into saying, okay, these are things that council has made it quite clear that they're not willing to support. So we've never seen this exercise as it's like going out and building a shelter, and as we see the role of staff in this is working with this community group who's taken on this responsibility to facilitate, so when they do come up with ideas, we can help mold those ideas and hopefully work towards some success, so that we don't bring you one day something that you have no interest in approving and getting passed. So, Your Worship, that was our role. We saw this as trying to help a group that's actually taken on their responsibility to provide some answers for them, so they're not spinning their wheels, and to work with council to make those definitions, to define what's important, and come up with a Grand Forks solution.
So we do need to dispose of the motion on the table. Councillor Johnson.
I see this as this issue as two. One being we have an immediate need that we have to deal with now, and a long term, and that shouldn't really involve a lot of staff time at this point in time if we, come up with a workable solution. But long term is when we need to, I think, concentrate on definitions and changes and all of those good things that we've, bandied about tonight. And hopefully tomorrow we can come up with something that we can bring back to council that's going to deal with the immediate need.
Okay, I hate to play chairman, but in fact, we do have a motion on the floor that we need to dispose of, and then we need to get back to the report and how we're going to deal with that. At this point in time, the rudimentary issue in front of us is, do we support Councillor Zielinski's position that it's not our responsibility past deciding where it should go, or do we share responsibility for this problem in its totality with various other service providers and government? So if I could have a decision on that, then I think we should return to the issue of this report and decide how we're going to deal with the report. So the motion on the floor that I am seconding, Councillor Moslin has made, is that this is not just our responsibility.
Amendment.
It's an amendment, yeah. All those in favor of the amendment? All those opposed?
Can I clarify what the amendment
If you
was?
don't vote, you vote for it. So we already voted and you voted for it by not voting.
Okay.
Would you like to comment on that?
Well, all I see up there is, it is a shared responsibility. So does the motion say, the city of Grand Forks believes it is the city's responsibility to have an emergency shelter? Within the city, it is shared responsibility. So I'm wondering what the actual
No, so
amended motion says.
the actual complete motion would read, the city of Grand Forks believes that it is a shared responsibility with other levels of government and service providers to have an emergency shelter within the city. That would
Okay,
be,
and that's
that
the
would
motion
be
that
the
we
complete
just
motion.
decided on.
We voted on the amendment, and now we'll vote on the motion.
Yes.
Oh, okay, I see, yes, okay. And so on the motion with that amendment,
I'm sorry.
Councilors, with the motion with that amendment, all those in favor and opposed? One opposed. Okay, thank you. Now back to the report, and I'm listening to what our CAO is telling us here at this point, and I think it's incumbent on us at this point to accept this report in principle or in some fashion so that we can move forward with it. I think it's a good blueprint for going forward, and that we need to endorse it and the work that's gone into it to move us forward with definitions and the rest of the issues we're facing. Is that your impression? Councillor Mosley?
Your worship, you say endorse the report. I do want to thank the staff, and I think in attachment E, they've provided us with an action outline that it doesn't just need to be the city. Other people are going to play too. However, do we have to endorse the report? Can we just receive the report?
I'm not sure what would work best, but maybe you could give us some suggestions here. What would you like to see in terms of our support for this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we'd like to see maybe to talk about some dates and set some dates that we have here for an established timeline. If council's comfortable with that, I didn't want to make any assumptions about council's availability over the next few weeks to do this, but
And I hate to give us that power to decide what you're going to do and on what timetable you're doing it. So I'm thinking that a general support would allow you to fill in some of those things according to the work plans that you see coming up and how much time is going to be required.
I just was thinking maybe we could have like a date that we want to have things completed by. So just if council would like to give us a bit of a guideline in terms of so the interim needs assessment is something that we would need from those involved agencies. So is there something maybe we could put a bit of a timeline on them tomorrow at the meeting and say, could you provide this information by this Friday or something? I wasn't sure. I thought maybe Councillor Thompson or yourself or Councillor Mosman would be able to work with that group and find out what would be a reasonable timeline to have that information made available.
So there was discussion, as you're aware, of an informal count,
Yeah.
but getting something that is reasonably reflective of the people in desperate situations, so that we could have that done ASAP and get participation from the agencies and groups to share information, to look at overlaps, and to get something that we could at least hang our hat on as a basic number.
Those that are outside in the elements. Yeah. Not couch surfing or, whatever, but just at this point in time,
The
those are the
immediate.
people
Yeah.
that need.
Councillor Moslin, do you think you could bring that to your group?
Well, absolutely, Mayor. Especially the second one, workshop, councillor, stakeholder, staff. I guess the end date, in my mind, is that we don't have a lot of time. Execution and closure, I don't know, I think that means execution, the creation of an emergency shelter. That's what you mean by execution, right?
Not anyone.
The opening of the shelter, right? Well, I would say that they do, I don't know. I would say by November 30th. But I really, that's me. I would rather have the opportunity, staff, to run it by the committee or the advisory group tomorrow. Let them tell. They're the ones who are, their feet are on the ground. They'll have a much better knowledge what these dates would be, we would communicate that with staff immediately, after that meeting. So rather than, I don't want to speak for the committee.
So rather than just trying to set dates tonight, and I appreciate that you want to know because you want to do your other stuff that's sitting on the side. But can we get back to you after tomorrow's meeting?
Oh, absolutely. We just wanted to make sure that we were setting some timelines to,
Yeah.
because we know like we type time.
And we can take that forward and say, this is what we need, our staff needs to.
Okay, I like that, but I'm asking again, do we just accept this or do we accept it in principle? What level of endorsement do you want to make of the work that's been done here with this path forward?
I'd sort of receive it for information and refer it to the advisory committee.
That's a motion.
Yeah.
And any difficulty with that from staff?
I would say maybe refer the next step to the advisory group, because
Yeah.
to refer the whole report then means they're doing the work.
Yeah, no.
Refer the next steps as were laid out.
Yeah. The next step was that intermediate assessment.
Right, okay. That's the plan.
Yeah.
And we have a seconder, Councillor Corley. Okay. And is this inclusive of accepting it? We're going to accept it as a report and fill in the blanks in terms of the timing.
Yeah.
That's the motion? Is that clear enough?
I understand that's the intent of the motion, right? Councillor?
Yeah.
And does this then dispose of the report for tonight? Yes? Okay, that's the motion on the floor. Ready for the question? All those in favor? Opposed? Great, that was unanimous. And that brings us down to the end of the meeting, and we'll call for any comments, discussion from the floor, and I'll open it up to anybody who raises their hand first. Welcome back, sir. Would you identify yourself for the world?
Thank you, Your Worship. My name is Nigel James, and I'm a member of the corporation. That's right, I nearly said condominium. Yes, I'm back here for a time being, and in fact, I was only going to sit and just listen tonight, but I am very disturbed indeed. The fact that, unfortunately, because of the speed at which the report came out, it means that I get the impression that nobody really knows what the hell they're talking about. I made a comment before I heard it about definitions required. You've got to have definitions, and the definitions might be in the Annex A to the Community Charter, I think it is. But the basic comment I have is that, as I understand it, the city has no responsibility for housing as such, does it? Could you answer that question?
Responsibility to build
No, just for housing.
for not having enough housing?
No, just for housing in general.
That's not clear to me.
No, it's not clear. I mean, housing is, where people live, basically. Anyway, the point I'm going to make is that there is a department in the provincial government which is called BC Housing. It's their responsibility. Their job is to make sure that people in British Columbia are housed or unhoused or whatever they decide. It's their responsibility. Section 1 and Section 2 of the Charter are very clear indeed that if any responsibility is put on the municipal government at all, then the provincial government is to supply additional support and so on so that we can carry it out. To my way of thinking, all you've got to do is say to BC Housing, you've got a job, you've got a problem, BC Housing, you better sort it out, because we are not, firstly, responsible for it, and secondly, we haven't got the facilities to do it. So please get on and sort it all out. As for what's been happening, the people who lived in the warming shelter, even in the summer months, they were there for 5/6 of the year. Hadn't they thought about what was going to come around in 6/6 of the year? It strikes me that they've done nothing at all about it to help themselves in any way possible. And we have been left with this as a really nasty problem in our city, which is rather dividing us apart instead of getting us all working together. Another aspect that I feel strongly about as well is that you're asking for these service providers. I then immediately said, what's the definition of a service provider? I've never heard of them before, and I got the impression it's the churches and the charities and that sort of thing. The charities and the churches have got their own aims, etc., which is not supporting specifically the city or the council. They've got their own job to do. So I think it's unwise and unfair to ask them to help out with accommodation or land or whatever else. Perhaps they should come back and say, well, yes, we can help out with land. What we'll do is the front entrance to the City Hall, we'll use that as a shelter. Why not? I mean, it sounds outrageous, and it is outrageous. But I think you've got to get down and really think about how the hell you're going to sort out this problem. And it's not just the City Council, to my way of thinking. Probably Area D. The problem with Area D is it's outside Grand Forks. We are surrounded by Area D. And you've got to work together. Anyway, enough said. Thank you.
Thank you. Further from the gallery. Angela.
Yeah, Angela Nichols. We do need to work together, and I'm glad that you guys made some headway on agreeing that it's a shared responsibility. But at the same time, at the end of the night, everyone leaves, and there are people that are left sleeping outdoors. And not all of them have a motorhome like the one group that were in at the last meeting. Some don't have a tent, some don't have anything. And even though it's not freezing out, if you get wet in this rain, it is very difficult to try to warm up again. You get chilled, you get cold, and it is difficult to warm up when you're stuck outside. Even if you're wearing snow pants or you have a sleeping bag or anything else, if it gets wet, you're stuck with wet clothes. Wet shoes, wet socks, wet clothing, wet bedding. And so it does start to cause some major issues. Now, we've been lucky that it's been raining and it's been warmer, but as soon as the temperature goes down again, which it might even this weekend, then it's going to be freezing temperatures. And it's not okay. It is everyone's responsibility to some degree to make sure that we don't allow people to just freeze outside because we can't pull it together. It's ridiculous, you guys. And it's not just you guys, it's all of us. You know? We can't let it happen. And so we need to find a way. And I am disappointed that there hasn't been any discussion about actual locations. Because there are a lot of locations. And the front entrance of City Hall, that could be a place to be used. Literally, to save people's lives in an emergency. And so I would like to think that everyone can realize that as much as we're working together, it could be a little while yet before we have a shelter in place for the season. And so what is going to happen? Can we open up someplace else, which typically wouldn't normally be, acceptable given the parameters that we all want to put on them? But is there somewhere that we can say, yeah, if it gets really cold, there is this place that they can go to for this amount of time and be warm? Can we do that as a community and everyone pitch in to make sure that people are okay? Sorry, but that's where I am.
Thank you, Angela. And a short one?
A short one, indeed, Your Worship. The lady gave me a brilliant idea. we have 52 unoccupied residences off 19th Street. You could also say to BC Housing, okay, don't let 2 or 3 or 4 of them be occupied by people. Use those as the winter shelter under whatever rules the BC Housing wish to provide.
Thank you, Nigel. Okay, anything further from the gallery? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Actually, I didn't ask the media. Jensen,
I'll talk tomorrow after the meeting tomorrow.
okay. All right, I'm sorry to neglect you. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Mosley.